Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. This session is on True Value of Food, a call to action to solve climate change and other crises. Yes, I now invite Ms. Dipali Khanna, Vice President, Asian Office, Rockefeller Foundation, to conduct the proceeding of today's session.
We at the Rockefeller Foundation are committed to improve the dietary quality of food for 500 million people through more equitable and regenerative food systems within the next 10 years. The foundation is committed over $100 million to its good food strategies spread across 3 years. For today's discussion on true value of food, a call to action to solve climate change and other crises, we're proud to have partnered with the Tata Cornell Institute of Agriculture and Nutrition for co-curating this track with us. I would like to thank Dr. Prabhu Pingali, Director, Tata Cornell Institute, and his amazing team members, Dr. Bhaskar Mitra and Dr. Raghav Puri, for their valuable perspectives. Our keynote speaker for the panel, Dr. Pingali, unfortunately will not be able to join us today due to unavoidable circumstances, but he has deputed Dr. Raghav, who is going to be speaking on his behalf. So thank you for joining us today, Raghav. I must also take this opportunity to introduce and welcome our knowledgeable panelists. We have with us Mr. Anupam Ravi, a Senior Vice President, GIST Advisory, a leading provider of impact data and intelligence. Mr. Ravi brings to the table a decade of experience in environmental analytics. Next with us is Dr. Shakira Yunus, India Head of Health and Nutrition at the World Food Program. Dr. Yunus is a doctor of medicine by training and has been working extensively on nutrition and school feeding programs over the last many years. Last but not the least with us is Ruben Gregan, biodiversity expert at the United Nations Environment Program. Ruben has been supporting the implementation of TERI agri-food framework, which is a scientific framework to better understand the complex and extensive agri-food value chains in India. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. It really means a lot to us. Without much ado, I will straight away dive into the topic for today's discussion. Transforming food systems is critical to address climate change and other global crises. The convergence of the 4 crises of climate change, COVID-19, conflicts, and associated high costs, or the 4 Cs as we refer to them, more urgent than ever, require agri-food systems to be sustainable and resilient. Current approaches to assess the success or profitability of food production, processing, and consumption do not reflect the full costs of these activities on such areas such as health, climate, and equity. This leads to uninformed decision-making that further entrenches and exasperates global challenges. Even among players that actively consider the effects of these areas, the economic and regulatory incentives to address them often do not exist, leading to misaligned incentives, asymmetrical rewards and benefits, and losses for the ecosystem of food systems. To accelerate the development of technological innovations, facilitate the adoption of new revenue streams for environmental or nutritional services, as well as change incentives for farmers and food producers, and to shift consumer preferences towards a more sustainable, equitable, and nourishing food system, we need a clear and transparent understanding of those costs and benefits and how they're allocated in and by them. India is currently the world's 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases at the national level. About 18% of these emissions come from agriculture, including livestock. Approximately a quarter of crop residues generated annually in India are burned in the fields, emitting 1.12 metric tons of mixed carbon along with methane and nitrous oxides. with the increasing dominance of wheat and rice attributable to a complex interplay between policies of minimum support prices and public distribution system, the areas under coarse grain, such as millets, maize, and barley, has declined. Such over-dependence on a few crops has resulted in a regional imbalance in cropping patterns. Excessive water table depletion, increased methane emissions, soil infertility, and nutrition available to vulnerable populations. A high amount of fertilizer subsidy further exacerbates the situation by often encouraging farmers to use unscrupulous amounts of fertilizers with the hope of getting better yields. But this in turn, as we all know, degrades both soil and food quality without any sustainable long-term improvements in the yield. In this backdrop, the track, the true value of food, a call to action to solve climate change and other crises, will explore from a policy angle the importance and application of the concept of true value of food. Through discussions, the panel will explore examples of the application of the true cost analysis and similar frameworks such as TEBA agri-food, illustrating how TCA can serve as a tool for four things. First, for crisis management of transboundary threats. Second, to better understand the interlinkages between pressing issues such as climate change and biodiversity loss. Third, to improve food production systems by making them more resilient. And fourth, to establish pathways towards healthy, sustainable, and affordable diets. Translating calculated environmental impacts and costs with TCA broadens the perspective and enables effective policy design to transform food systems, making an important contribution to the 1.5-degree target. True cost accounting is a tool to transform food systems under the conditions of and as a response to climate change. True cost accounting is an innovative tool that provides a holistic understanding of the relationships between agriculture, food, and climate change, biodiversity, and human well-being, and provides a systemic approach to assess, measure, and value the positive and negative impacts of food system interventions. The true cost accounting helps to better manage the complexity of today's challenges and enables the identification of what needs to change in food systems to allow a nutritious, socially just, sustainable, and climate-friendly diet for all. Before I pass on the mic to Dr. Raghav Puri, I also wanted to take this opportunity to really thank Rituraj Sahu, who's been working very intensely in really putting this session together. He's part of the team. And so thank you, Rituj, for all the hard work and getting us to this point. I'm hoping that this is going to be an interesting session because, you know, besides hearing from the panelists, to really understand from your perspective as to how you see we can advance these conversations is really going to be important. So on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Raghav.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Raghav Puri. I'm a researcher at the Tata Cornell Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition at the Cornell University. So today, what I'll do is I'll begin by talking about true value of food, why is it important, and then talk about its application to India. So application of true cost accounting, which is TCA in India. And throughout my presentation, TCI and TCA is going to be a tongue twister. So what is true value of food? So the price we pay for any food item does not reflect its true cost. It does reflect partially some costs, for example, costs of inputs, seeds, fertilizers, the cost of land, labor, but there are lots of positive and negative costs that do not get reflected in this price that we pay. So, for example, positive impacts of agriculture, it provides employment, it reduces malnutrition. Also, a lot of negative impacts, for example, greenhouse gas emissions from crop production, and the list can go on. So one way to address this, to kind of identify the true cost or estimate the true cost of food is to use this approach called the true cost accounting method, or TCA. So TCA is an evolving approach to measure and value the positive and negative environmental, social, health, and economic costs related to food systems. There are lots of different frameworks that have come up. One of the most famous and prominent frameworks is the TEEP framework, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Agri-Food Framework. That was developed by UNEP, and Ruben is going to talk about this. A more recent application of TCA on a large scale was by the Rockefeller Foundation, which released the True Cost of Food in the US report in 2021. And so I thought, rather than me delve into the report because there's so much, I'd share this 90-second video that Rockefeller prepared. So, video.
And it's just a slice of the control. Consider impacts on the environment. That's realized the cost of that. Society does that now. It's not costs. That's what change.
So that was a brief introduction to the true cost of food in the US report. And so what the report found was that the current expenditure that people pay in the US for food is about 1.1 trillion. But when you account for these other external costs that are hidden, that are not accounted for in the price, it comes to about 3.2 trillion, which is 3 times the amount. So what the approach that Rockefeller used was, they first identified the focus areas that they wanted to focus on. So in this case, the focus areas were human health, environment, biodiversity, livelihoods, and economy. And within these, they identified metrics. So I'm kind of going through how a true cost accounting would happen in the real world. So for instance, let's take the example of human health. So the largest chunk of the cost came from non-communicable diseases. And here, these non-communicable diseases are attributable to food. So not just general non-communicable diseases. Then there's greenhouse gas emissions in environment, there's land use and biodiversity. So the second part of this exercise was to identify these metrics. Once you've identified the metrics, and this is the tricky part, you have to quantify and monetize each metric. So I've taken an example here. I picked up some numbers from India, which is how would you estimate the greenhouse gas emissions from biomass burning on cropland in 2018? It's 2018 because that's the last year available for which data is available on the GHG platform India. And so that was about 7.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions. The second part is, what is the cost of carbon or greenhouse gas emissions in India? Again, there are lots of numbers. I sort of narrowed down on this one, which is, this is an interesting paper that estimates the social cost of carbon across countries. And for India, the figure is $86. And so when you multiply the two, you get $627.8 million. Now, again, I'm not suggesting this is the correct figure, but this is the closest you can get to the estimates. And I'll talk about how we can deal with this sort of vagueness of the estimate in the coming slides. But what's important is that not everything can be measured quantitatively. And so as part of the TCA community, I think there's always a conversation about qualitatively assessing metrics. I remember when we were talking about the Indian scenario, a big issue is farmer suicides. How do you put a value to a person's life? Which I was surprised people do put a value to people's life. It's called the value of a statistical life, VSL. But again, so, these are sort of moral, ethical questions that, you have to discuss. But again, qualitative assessment is also very important. Another example, I think, in the US report was treatment of animals. Now, how do you quantify poor treatment of animals? So again, these are things that can be dealt qualitatively. So what about India? What's going on with TCA in India? Some of the studies that are happening right now, there's a study by UNEP, which I think uses the TEEB agri-food framework. And it's on agroforestry and organic farming in Uttaranchal and in Uttar Pradesh. There's a community-managed natural farming in Andhra Pradesh study that is being led by GIST. And then there's the TCA study of food subsidies that's being led by TCI. So what I'll do is I'll highlight what's happening with the TCI study, just to give you a sense of how we are applying TCA. These are very preliminary findings. We have one more year to go before we launch the final report. So Tata Cornell Institute is using TCA to estimate the true cost of subsidized rice and wheat sold through India's PDS. I'll narrow it down a little more. Subsidized rice and wheat sold through the National Food Security Act. So some states kind of add their own rice and wheat. We're not looking at that. We're looking at the central government's subsidized rice and wheat. So why did we decide on the study? So this is a study we are doing in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. And we thought that, one of the growing concerns right now is over the negative environment and health impacts of intensive rice and wheat cultivation in Northwest India. And this is primarily driven by procurement of rice and wheat for the PDS. So a very interesting graph map is the map you see on the left shows the percentage of grain procured for the PDS, and about 50% comes from Punjab and Haryana. Whereas if you look at the map on the right, where's this grain consumed? It's primarily consumed in the highly populated states of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Maharashtra. So what we decided is that in order to, how do we apply TCA to the situation? So we thought we'll estimate the true cost of 3 PDS food baskets. The current food basket, which is the status quo or business as usual. It's the current PDS food basket with 5 kilograms of rice and wheat per person. On an average, some people get 35 kgs of rice as a family. The second option is a locally sourced PDS basket. So what if a lot more of the grain was being decentralized and procured in a decentralized manner? The government of India has had a program since 1997 to encourage decentralized procurement. Some states have been stars in doing this, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, whereas some states, they do produce a lot of their own rice, but because the procurement infrastructure doesn't exist, they do not end up procuring the rice from their state. So it ends up coming from Andhra Pradesh and Haryana and Punjab. The third PDS food basket that we're going to look at is the augmented PDS food basket, where we would include more nutritious food items such as pulses and millets. Some states do give millets, and it's on a rising trend. It's also part of the NFSA that you can give 1 kg of millets. So again, we're going to do the calculations for what does it mean to include, let's say replace 1 kg of wheat with 1 kg of millet in the existing PDS food basket. And those are the kind of calculations you will be able to do once this exercise is over. So what we are going to do is we'll quantify and monetize costs associated with the production, storage, distribution, and consumption of rice, wheat, millets, and pulses. We're using existing studies and administrative data for this study. I'm looking forward to hearing from Ruben and Anupam, because I think some studies are also doing primary data collection. But this is a national level study. So these are very preliminary findings. So what you see here is the true cost of the current PDS food basket, but broken down by its sub-costs. So for instance, the first one you see on the left is the price paid by consumers. Consumers pay 3 rupees or 2 rupees for rice and wheat respectively when they buy it from the PDS. Then there's $0.5 billion, which is by state government. So in some states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, the rice is free. So the state government pays the 3 rupees and the 2 rupees. Now the government's made it free across India since January. The third bar you see is the subsidy bill, the food subsidy bill. This is the cost of procuring, storing, distributing wheat through the PDS. It's about 13.8 billion. So these 3 costs are the ones that we would see in a budget. This is what we would see as the cost of the PDS. But what we've done is we've gone ahead and looked at the environmental impact. In this particular case, this is just the greenhouse gas emissions from rice and wheat cultivated for the PDS. And that comes to about $5.1 billion. And finally, we have the human health bar that's about 1 billion. This is only the cost of respiratory illnesses in Punjab and Haryana. This is a study that was done by IFPRI, and they focused on Delhi, Punjab, and Haryana. But our hope is to expand this to neighboring states where you also see the effect of crop burning. So this is all from crop burning that we all witness in North India. So what you see now is state-wise distribution of true cost. So per beneficiary true cost of the current food basket. And when you divide it by state, as would be expected, a lot of these costs are borne by or produced by the states that are providing the rice and wheat. And it's largest in Haryana and Punjab and Telangana, which is where most of the rice comes from. Rice, as you know, is a primary emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So to conclude, I thought it would be good to look at, we've talked about this method and people are using it, but what are the limitations and opportunities that arise from TCA? So the first, and I think the most important aspect of just applying TCA in the Indian context is the availability and quality of data to quantify and monetize these costs. I remember when we first started working with the Rockefeller Foundation, we thought we would replicate the US study in India. And I remember when we got down to it, there were just no numbers available. And the same numbers for the Rockefeller report were, available from the US government. But I think the opportunity here is that TCA can help identify areas for future research. So even at our institute, as we work through this process, we're already identifying research questions and areas where we could do estimations and modeling to improve quantification and monetization of these costs. The second part is use of assumptions and modeling to quantify impacts. Now this plays a huge role. Once you get into this exercise, there's so many numbers. If you put in $86, the effect is 5 billion. If you put in like $20, it goes down to a fourth. And so I think what's very important, and this is something that was very good with the Rockefeller report. I think that needs to be commended, which is they released their whole model. They released the Excel file. You can go there and see how the calculations were done, what numbers were used. And I think what's very helpful in that is if I disagree and I say, oh, the cost of carbon in India is not 86, it's higher or lower, I can just open that model and put in my number and know how that affects the model. So I think as we begin using TCA on a larger scale, sort of this practice of making data and models public in the beginning, and I think Rockefeller set the tone for that, would be excellent if we all can do that. I know for our study, we have our plan is to release our model when it's available in November this year. Finally, resistance to changing existing systems. So, lack of political will, high costs. And so in this limitation, I think what's important to remember is that the idea of TCA is not to suggest, so there's two sort of, one major issue with TCA, which is that there's a worry that TCA might be suggesting that you increase the price of food. So, if all these high costs are not accounted for in the true price, in the current price, why not increase the price of food? And that's not the aim of TCA or the TCA community. The idea is to identify areas where these costs exist in the food system and then maybe target those with particular interventions to bring those costs down. So I think that's an important point. Our policy brief is available on our website. It's also available on this QR code. And I'm happy to answer questions, if you have them through email, and we can also do that later on during the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghav, for that insightful presentation. I think you touched upon what is true value of food, how to measure it. You use examples of the US study, you used examples of the India study. I think at this point, it might be useful to think about what are the other tools that exist and which have been used in the past to measure the cost of food and similar things. So I'm going to turn to Ruben. And Ruben, I think I know that you've been working on TEEB, which is the Economics and Ecosystem Biodiversity, a global initiative focused on making nature's value visible. That's how TEEB has been defined. And its principal objective is to mainstream the values of biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision making. So my question to you, Ruben, is one is how have you applied the concept of true value in while using the TEEB framework, and what have your learnings been?
Sure. Thanks, Ritich. So to first answer your question on how the TEEB agri-food framework uses the concept of true value accounting, true cost accounting in TEEB itself, is basically, if I can answer it by shedding some light on the TEEB agri-food framework, which will in short answer that question, and then probably go on to discuss some of the approaches that we've used in different countries, as well as what we are using in India right now. TEEB, essentially, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, what it does is it presents you a framework or a method for true value accounting. So, if I may put it, measuring the value, the true value that ecosystems and the services that it provides, the benefits that it provides to society. When you are applying the TEEB framework, pretty much what you're doing is you are essentially carrying out a true value accounting. So as you've rightly mentioned, the principal objective of TEEB is to mainstream the values of biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision making at all levels. And it does that by offering you this approach where decision makers can, one, recognize the wide benefits of ecosystem services and biodiversity. Secondly, demonstrating those values in economic terms. And lastly, where it is appropriate, actually capturing those into decision making. So TEEB in itself, there's a wide range of applications of TEEB. this aggregated data is not available. So that's what we have tried to do in collecting primary data. So our research partners have conducted surveys to actually conduct to supplement the secondary data, but also that opportunity lies in strengthening and accelerating sort of the collection of data and also reporting it on the NVIS platform when I actually talk about this. So that's one. The other thing is also trying to improve your capacities within the government to actually carry out, true cost accounting sort of work. So what we've done, the strategy and the guidance that the steering committee have provided, we've partnered with the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and it also provides this advantage where they have long-term data sets, especially on soil health, soil organic carbon. But at the same time, you need to develop these capacities of government institutions to actually carry out this work and, mainstream TCA into decision making. That's one. Just a few things from, our studies in other countries. In Indonesia, if I draw parallels, the TEEB agri-food assessment there is on agroforestry, and it's shown that, the agri-food sort of outputs can be increased by about 27%. And it actually will contribute significantly to ensuring local food security and also the availability of nutritious food. So these are some of the results that we're getting in Thailand. The study on shifting over from the current practices to more sustainable practices on rice cultivation is showing that there's probably between 2019 to 2035 that you could actually gain benefits of about $2 billion. So these are some of those results that are coming in. We'd be happy to have you involved in discussions on the draft results once they come out, probably ending March. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you for sharing those interesting details with us. I think one thing that is clear is that true cost accounting or the TEEB framework, these are different approaches to structured methods of valuation, of visibilizing something that is invisible to us, which brings me to actually speaking to Anupam, because Anupam has been working with GIST Advisory, which has taken a lead on the TEEB framework actually initially. And in addition to that, Anupam has also been using, I believe, similar mechanisms, but in the context of industry and understanding the true cost of corporations and society. So probably I think Anupam, you can come in here and if you can share your experiences or applications of true cost accounting beyond food systems, and if you think there are any learnings that can be incorporated from your experiences of applying this framework into food systems.
Sure, thank you. Maybe I'll address that question with a more primary question, Rituj, which is basically addressing to this challenge of performance measurement. So currently, if you see how performance is measured, whether we look into the performance of corporations or financial institutions or agricultural food systems itself, the performance measurement is only looking into one aspect of wealth, which is financial value addition, or how much of money or revenue did you generate from the business activity. It totally ignores all the other stocks and flows of the capitals or forms of wealth, which should be taken into account when we are looking into the volume of profit or the revenue which is generated by a business. So with this problem, what GIST has been trying to do is to apply a more holistic framework of measuring performance itself. How do we measure the performance holistically, not only just focused on financial value addition or what is the revenue or the the benefit which is generated for the shareholders of the company, but how do we expand the horizon of this performance measurement beyond the benefits generated for shareholders, but to expand it to all the other types of stakeholders? And this is where the four capitals approach comes in. The natural capital, human capital, social capital, and financial value addition, which is also called as produce capital. So when we assess a performance of a business or a company, it can be applied across the whole value chain. It can be applied to the direct operation or upstream or downstream of the value chain of a business activity or a company. We look into all the performance across all the capitals. So if a company generated $1 billion of revenue for their shareholders, what was the value which they generated, which they added or eroded across the other three capitals? So what was the value which they generated, whether it was positive? And in most of the cases, it's negative for the natural capital. So because of the emissions which the company did, the greenhouse gas emissions, as Raghav also pointed out, a dollar value of $86 was used in your case, as you highlighted. So using economic proxies to value the emissions, whether it's GHG emissions, water consumption, the water and land pollution which is generated by the companies, or the waste, the hazardous and non-hazardous waste which the companies generate, or any form of land which they are responsible for directly occupying and transforming. So when we start putting price on all these what is called as externalities, the third party cost of doing business, when a company generates $1 billion revenue, at the same time, once we start putting a price, economic proxy on these externalities, you will see that the dollar value, the $1 billion number, would start looking very less. But there is also massive positive. So if we look into the Indian IT companies, Wipro, TCS, Infosys, they add a massive human capital value to the Indian economy. They train thousands of graduates every year from college, and there is a value addition. So the trajectory of the earning capacities of these individuals who have gone through the training from Infosys, Wipro, or TCS becomes drastically different. And that's the net present value of the future incomes which these individuals can earn because of the training provided by these companies. That's a very massive positive value addition which has been done by companies. So that's the aspect which gets covered under human capital. And then we have classic financial value addition, but the financial value addition which we look into is not restricted to just the revenue or the profits, but it is the overall value addition which was done to the local or the global GDP. So what was the taxes? The taxes which the company has paid is actually benefits society. The interest which they pay to banks is eventually going to the system. So the tier 2 value addition which they are doing. So if we look into the system of capturing or measuring the performance itself, if we shift away from this whole using accounting with only looking into profit and loss statements and start evaluating the performance across all these capitals, then we are actually talking about the true value or true cost accounting. And the same approach has been used by TEEB agri-food framework. If we look into the TEEB agri-food framework, we have 4 key categories. We have input, we have outputs, we have invisible inputs, and we have invisible outputs. The inputs are basically, land, farmer, fertilizers, chemicals, water irrigation, which is provided as an anthropocentric inputs in the system. The outputs, we looked into a lot of slides, productivity, per hectare productivity, etc. But the moment the framework starts looking into the invisible inputs, the ecosystem services, the soil fertility, the water provisioning potential, the carbon sequestration potential, or the resilience of the habitats. These are invisible inputs. Nature doesn't put a price to, they don't. It is free of cost to the agri system. The challenge is that very less attention has been paid in evaluating the size of this free value which the agri system is getting. And since no value has been put on this free resource, nobody wants to take actions to, to maintain the stock or maintain the flows. So if you don't have, if you don't maintain the stocks, the flows will keep on deteriorating, which we are seeing. The soil fertility is definitely reduced so significantly over time. So we are talking about the invisible inputs in the system. At the same time, we have invisible outputs as well, which are the externalities. So the invisible outputs are the health impacts because of the pesticides or the chemicals used, or the indirect impacts of the fertilizers or leaching of nitrogen and phosphorus to ecosystems, impacts on biodiversity. So all of these are invisible outputs of the system. Until unless we don't start accounting for all the inputs, outputs, as well as the invisible inputs and invisible outputs, we are not going to be able to solve this massive problem. Now, coming to your question, Rituj, how this has been applied for, companies. I mean, GIST has been applying the same four capital framework for doing analysis for companies. And, as of now, we have done analysis for as many as 12,000 companies, and we have a time series analysis of these companies. And just to quote a number, if we look into the top 1,500 companies based in Europe, the size of the direct operational impact, I'm just talking about gate to gate impact, is as high as $500 billion. So we are just talking about the gate to gate impacts. It does not include any upstream impacts. Typical numbers, you talk about electric utility, per $1 million of revenue, they lead to approximately $180,000 of impacts. Cement manufacturer, 120,000. Paper and pulp, 95,000. So these are the kind of numbers which these business operations are generating. These, if we start putting the economic proxies on these externalities, the numbers start to be, in billions of dollars. And the challenge is that today's externalities are tomorrow's risk and day after cost. So it's the cost currently is being borne by the society, but eventually businesses will have to face these costs. And there are different mechanisms, there are regulations. It's called as 3Ds of internalization, which is whether you design it through regulations or you through decree, which is policies, or through disaster. And we really don't want to, leave it to the last stage of disaster, because unless we don't design these external costs into the system through regulations, society is going to continue to bear the cost. And right now we have come to a stage where there's no further, potential to, absorb these external costs. We talk about planetary boundaries. Most of the planetary boundaries are at verge of extreme risk. So there's no buffer left to add to these externalities until unless we don't start incorporating these externalities in business as usual scenarios. This can't stop. So and if I can take some examples, I can take Wipro's example, an Indian case. Wipro has been publishing their both direct operational as well as upstream impact calculations, dollar value negative impacts which they generate from business operations in their annual reports for the last 5 years. There are many other companies who have literally internalized these kind of analysis in their day-to-day operations. There's example of Solvay, there is Kering Group, there is Novartis. There are many other examples. The other side of the problem is I guess Raghav also touched upon, is the data availability as well as standardization of the framework itself, that how, or standardization of the methodology itself, that how do you put a proxy to these externalities? What is the right economic multiplier which should be used to value these externalities? And this is where there has been a lot of initiatives which has been going on. There is something called as Value Commission, whose key objective is to come up with these multipliers, these valuation factors, which can be used by everyone. So there are other initiatives. There's something called as IFVI being led by Harvard and value balancing alliance. Again, the purpose is same, to come up with standardized methods or frameworks which can be used to apply these to value the externalities. And regulation is becoming much more conscious of these externalities now. If I talk about the European context, if you look into any of the directives which has been passed recently, you talked about CSRD, SFDR, all of these regulations talk about double materiality, which is how does the business impacts the outside world, which is called as the inside out impact of the business. And at the same time, the regulations are asking the companies to explain and disclose what is the outside in impacts of the external factors on the business. And the outside in is really critical and important for agri-food system, because you can't control it. It's already happening. But the inside out is something which companies can definitely start reporting, and regulations is already putting a lot of pressure on companies to start disclosing this information. So things are moving quite quickly. I mean, when back in 2013, when I started doing these economic valuations, nobody knew about capitals analysis. But now, if you go and talk to people, everyone knows about the capitals, and they do understand the importance and value of doing this kind of assessments. So I'll just conclude by saying that if we don't start measuring it, we can't manage it. So that's the whole agenda.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Anupam. I think you touched upon many important things, and which makes me take a step back and think about can all externalities be expressed in monetary terms? How do some of these findings translate into actual policies and programs? And that gives me a great segue to actually move on to our next panelist, Dr. Sharika Yunus, who's been working on translating on-ground findings into policies and programs aimed at improving nutrition among masses. So, Dr. Yunus, my question to you would be, how might we use this true cost accounting mechanism or mechanisms such as TEEB to actually translate into to actually make a difference or design policies and programs differently, which are aimed at improving access to nutrition to people? And once you have answered that, maybe you can also think about enlightening us with what are the challenges that you foresee in making that happen.
For that question, and let me let you all onto a secret in the room. I'm not an expert like the two gentlemen on either side of me. I'm here making up for a colleague who could be present. Let me just say that when I started reading up about TCA, the interesting bit was, despite working in the development field, it was something that I wasn't aware of for the longest time. So it was fairly eye-opening for me that when we buy food, it's, we just look at the consumer cost of the food. We've never really looked at how it impacts health or what's the environmental cost of it. And that's a very interesting way of, reimagining our entire food systems and our entire approach to food systems. Let me just also say here and probably reiterate some of the points that Ruben made, that this entire TCA approach, and also Raghav sort of said to this, it in no way says that the cost of the food needs to be increased. It's what can you do around the intervention so that you sort of minimize the impact of the intervention on the environment as well as the health-related aspects of it. And to just say that it doesn't seem that the government is totally unaware of the externalities of those costs at all. There are several schemes that the government has, and Ruben alluded to them, in terms of promoting organic farming in the country, through dedicated schemes like the Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana. The Prime Minister spoke about, the need to increase the total area restored from land degradation to about 26 million hectares. There's a push towards natural farming. There's an entire push in the country around millets and millet consumption, with fairly high minimum support prices also being put around millets. Now, So the government seems to, understand the issue. What is it that we could do around policy? Probably, I guess some of these ideas need to be brought to the attention of, of the government. They need to be sensitized across levels as to what these approaches are. The other is probably we could push policies to start incentivizing those food stakeholders who are working positively to minimize the impact, the adverse impact of the food on health and environment. There could be emphasis on production of pulses, millets, horticulture, and developing these systems by making them available through safety nets and thus reimagining the entire structure around subsidies as they exist today. And an interesting approach, since I work a lot with the Food Safety Standards Authority of India, and they are coming in with this entire concept of front of pack labeling. So perhaps, having labels which talk about the value of the food, how much does it really mean in terms of degrading the environment? What's the sort of impact on health? And therefore enhancing consumer awareness around that particular piece as well. Now, in terms of challenges, what I would foresee is, especially around the intervention and talking about interventions such as mainstreaming millets, or introducing pulses and oils, etc., as a part of the PDS food basket. Especially around millets, there's this whole issue about the shelf life of the millets, and those are the more practical things that we need to consider. It makes a lot of sense, but will it survive the sort of supply chains that we have in the country? So that's one challenge that needs to be dealt with. The other challenge is, wheat and rice has been pushed down our throats for the past decades, and millets was usually seen as a poor man's food. So there's this entire acceptability issue around millets. Do we, which then basically means that we would need to invest a lot into social behavior change communication. If we talk about pulses, etc., and look at the leaky systems that we have, the public distribution system, there's a lot that the government's done in terms of plugging the loopholes in the system. But the moment, high value commodities like pulses or oil get added into the system, it's not as if there isn't a cost associated with that. There is cost in terms of transportation, there's cost in terms of leakages and diversions, there's cost in terms of packaging, etc. So these are all worthwhile things to do, but there is another side that probably needs to be unpacked and looked at in a bit more detail. So I'll stop here and pass it on.
Thank you, Dr. Yunus. I think you touched upon many very interesting points related to incentives and creating disincentives and how we might look at millets, something which is very popular in the current discourse right now. Probably it might be worth applying the TCA framework to consider the true cost of millets, whether and that would actually maybe give us answers to whether millets can actually be resilient with the existing structures of the supply chains or not. That's definitely worth looking into, and that's a point about what are the different applications of TCA and to what extent can it allow us to understand the different nuances of the existing programs and what it means for future programs. And at this point, I'll go back to Raghav, because I think when Raghav presented the findings in the beginning, something that stood out for me was that the true cost of rice and wheat in the study was found to be 40% higher than the price of the cost which is being borne by the government and the PDS consumers. I think linking that to the incentives point that Dr. Yunus raised. Raghav, can you probably share your opinion on how do you think can the government policy improve incentives or reduce disincentives to actually finally reduce the true cost of food? Because if the idea is to not increase the actual price of food, as we have found a large consensus about in this panel, how can we probably reduce true cost of food, and how can we tinker the incentives and disincentives to make that happen?
So I think in our study, we thought about this a lot when we started. When we started by saying, or you could replace something with, millets and pulses. But then that's easier said than done because do people want it or not? But also, are those millets and are those pulses available for procurement? So for instance, with our decentralized, the second basket about decentralized procurement, only certain states have that excess rice production that can be procured in a decentralized manner. For the rest, you'll still have a lot of it coming from Haryana and Punjab. And so I think what was helpful in our thinking about this was that what we are doing from our end is we are coming up with a state level number of what would it mean to replace a kilogram of rice or wheat with a kilogram of millet in each state. Now, once you have that number, we are making it available for that number to be used. And so hopefully it can be used to make a case for states that might be on the verge of sort of implementing a Orissa style millet mission, or a state that's interested in introducing pulses. So we are providing like numbers. There's already a debate going on. There's already a push to include millets and pulses. But I think by doing this TCA, you're providing some sort of evidence that we hope is going to be used in the future. The millet story is very interesting. We actually have a separate project on millets. We just got back from fieldwork from Chhattisgarh, and we had lots of cases where people laughed at us when we suggested that you grow millets, because as you said, Sharika, like the idea that millets is a poor person's crop, and so people have moved on from it to rice and wheat, and so why are we going to grow that again? But also just the yields are so low compared to if you're going to grow an acre of rice or an acre of millets. The yields are so low, even if you account for the input costs and everything, that like having that shift happen is so difficult and so challenging. So you said somebody should do a TC on millets. Well, I think we're kind of doing that with the PDS study. So hopefully we can explore it even more. One more point I had was just to give an example of how incentives and TCA could play a role in this. Every way, I've been in a lot of conversations over the past 4 months in different forums about the PDS and what do you do about it. And so a classic case is two things you hear is do away with the MSP, the cancer train from Punjab, like that's a very classic thing that comes up. And so for our study, we were trying to figure out how do you, we mentioned this, but we don't know the scale of it. Like, how do you quantify it? Again, difficult to do. But I know in the US report, there was a whole section on the cost of health treatments that are resulting from food related problems. Now, again, attributing everything to food, et cetera, is very difficult. But I thought, something like a TCA could be used to come up with an estimate or a number to at least put a number on that, as opposed to just talk about, the strain that goes, with cancer patients from Punjab to Rajasthan.
Thank you for sharing that, Raghav. I think like if I were to look at this discussion and think about like some of the important takeaways, then one of the things that is clear to me is that like TCA or true cost accounting is not just an academic exercise. I must also I can't re-emphasize it and emphasize it enough for everyone present here. I think it's not a tool that we are doing only to generate evidence. While generating evidence is super, super important in order to make more informed choices, in order to make more informed policies and programs. It's also one of the important implications of TCA is to understand that while there's a large agreement that we may need to do things differently when it comes to food systems, we may need to consume differently, we may need to produce food differently. One of the questions and one of the factors that always comes up in these discussions is that where's the money going to come from, where the resource is going to come from, right? And what TCA does is that it tells you that these costs are already being incurred. These are just hidden in the system. So if you were to make any change, it's important to probably think about these hidden costs and try to think about repurposing them through levels of policies and programs that already exist, so that while what you can look at a positive net impact to the society as a large, as opposed to increasing that cost, what we are calling true cost, more and more. So that's one of the major takeaways for me. It's not just an abstract exercise, it's an it's an exercise in evidence making, which has many practical implications. Another thing that I think definitely like stands out for me is like something that like almost everyone touched in this panel about how it's important to have standardized data and access to data, right? Like that's something that we as researchers, we as like policymakers, that we as philanthropists, we all look for like hardcore data, and we look at like in trying to translate this data into insights, and which can then inform policies and programs which eventually impact all of us, which impact vulnerable populations. So I think it's very important that all of us think about like standardizing some of these approaches and access to data. For example, Raghav pointed out in the beginning that in the study that Tata Cornell Institute is right now conducting on the true cost analysis of food in India, they are going to eventually like make their Excel sheet, the methodology, the framework, and the data that they use to arrive at the figures public. That's super important, not only to enable a discourse, but to also like course correct that discourse whenever the time arrives and as and when the need arrives. So I think those are some of my takeaways. And like I'm like, as much as I realize that like it's that the food systems present today have a huge cost beyond what is visible. I also see that there are interesting tools like TCA, like TEEB, and in fact, like what Dr. Sharika mentioned about how we might want to like look at nutrition from the angle of TCA. I think those are some of the important things that we might want to consider while looking at, giving our insights into creation of new policies and programs. So yeah, I think it's been a really insightful discussion, and I would like to thank the panel for their valuable time, and everyone present here. Thank you so much for being here. I'd also like to open up the floor for any questions at this point.
The approach is also towards the doubling farmers' income, and plus also to address the climate change on ground. So in that case, this particular approach which you are talking about fits very well to aware actually the government system functionaries how they should plan their future course.
Sure. No, this is a very interesting question, and let me start with answering that. The corporate entity originally started as an NGO, which was called as GIST India States Trust, and that was for the first time back in 2009, 2010. GIST did a complete economic evaluation of the wealth of all these states. These were called as GIST monographs. It is still public. So there's a monograph on human capital, there's on forest. So there are multiple monographs which are available. So this work for government agencies, it originally just started off with doing this kind of analysis. But the whole, and Pawan, who is the CEO and founder, he decided to, switch from only looking into the government agencies to corporates, because corporates are the one who are driving these impacts so significantly. I mean, 2/3 of the whole economy is private sector. And if we really have to solve this problem of externalities, the focus has to be not only on the government side, but also on private sector. And it is not limited to companies or corporations. It has major implications on financial institutions as well. I mean, think about a bank who has who has to lend a certain fraction of their loan portfolio to agriculture, or many other priority sectors. What happens to the interest which they are earning today in 10 years time frame? Will they will be getting the same in revenue or the interest going forward is a big question. So it has a lot of implications, and a lot of national accounting work is also going on. US has just started a full national accounting project. China has already started way back. So I guess we need something of similar sort in India as well.
I think we now have the international standardization through the CA framework in terms of national accounting. But I also wanted to kind of add was we under this project we also have a specific component on private sector, and they've introduced the TEEB agri-food guidelines for business, and that's being implemented by Capital's Coalition along with the Center for Responsible Business here in India.
Kind of aspect when you go in the state like Bihar, where lots of anxieties are there to adopt any new ways of functioning. So if these kind of interventions attract more corporate investment in the state like Bihar, that kind of methodology need to be communicated well to the government. This is why I thought of understanding from you. Thank you.
Thanks. My comment is on the TCI. I really like the idea, and congratulations to both Rockefeller Foundation for supporting it and TCI for undertaking it. So I want to make 2 or 3 points quickly. One is, if you think about it, PDS doesn't change diets. PDS in India, especially after NFSA, is essentially a cash transfer scheme. If you look at barring the very poorest households, just because rice is free doesn't mean people have started eating more rice or more wheat. The price elasticities are very, very low. So it's an income transfer program. What changes what we produce is the public procurement. And I know the two justify each other. The PDS justifies public procurement and public procurement justifies us. But by itself, PDS is essentially an inefficient, or from a certain point of view, highly efficient cash transfer program. So even if you change the commodity basket of PDS, unless the procurement regime changes, you will continue to have more rice, more wheat. You may export it at subsidized prices to the rest of the world. So the pinching point is public procurement that continues in states where it's not sustainable. And I think what TCA type exercises can do is, normally when we discuss cost of production, we discuss the cost that CSCP estimates, the A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, the whole list. It's incredibly important because that cost is a financial costing. It looks at opportunity cost only of land, tenancy, etc. We need to add the electricity subsidy, the emissions, not just of crop residue burning. India's electricity is highly dirty, right? So the coal additional unit of electricity that you use to irrigate is emitting a bunch of things in the air, including here in Delhi city, in Okhla, etc. So putting numbers on those things, it's not that politicians are not aware of it, but I think it would kind of make the discussion, like, it would attract more attention. And in democracy, that's how you hope or expect that changes. A couple of questions that TCA exercise will face challenges, methodological challenges, it would be interesting to grapple with, is how does this current public procurement and PDS complex, how does it affect, more public procurement, affect the agricultural diversity, meaning what we produce, and our diet diversity? To what extent? That's where the things ultimately come from if we exclude export and import. And that won't be an easy exercise. You will have to estimate elasticity, substitution, a bunch of the models that you were talking about, Raghav. And the bigger question that would emerge is, then can we move in India to a crop neutral food policy, food and agriculture policy? I think that's the meta question that we have to talk about. Very few of us are against subsidies to farmers or subsidies to agriculture or even subsidies to consumers. Can we make it? I don't think, I'm not a huge fan of supporting millet, etc. One crop. Or if you talk to nutritionists, millet is not a magical crop. It's just one of the other cereals, etc. It's better than rice, I guess, white polished rice, but it's not magic. So how do we move to a crop neutral policy? And when you do, I hope someone, there will be a next stage of a Rockefeller Foundation supported study where we look at, if we make this switch, what's the political cost? What is the incidence? Who will suffer and who will win? If the most powerful lobbies will suffer, even if we know it's bad, it's not going to happen. Then how do you compensate those guys, farmers in Punjab, traders elsewhere? So I really hope that there will be appetite to do a second generation analysis, because if you think about it, they don't have dollar figures, but our political leaders know what's hurting them. Free electricity hurts them. They know it for 25 years. Public procurement is hurting them. That is also known. But then how do you change it? What is, government tried one thing, didn't work. How do you change it is something that will be, I think, a sequel to this kind of TCA type transparent accounting of the total cost. So yeah, thank you and all the best for this study. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Kaustav Chakrabarti. I wanted, out of academic interest, I thank you for the presentation number one, and I find this very intriguing, that entire discussion around TCA. I'm new to this, so my question might cross as the pedestrian, but kindly bear with me. So I know that the T20 Abu Dhabi, the Think 20 group of Abu Dhabi G20's presidency threw up this entire recommendation on adopting TCA and requested the governments of the G20 to take it up in their annual budgets as well. Then Food System Summit 2021 made similar recommendations. And I want to understand what is the appetite of the government. It doesn't have to be the national government, but since we are in the G20 presidency, in the G20 group, if any country has been very active in this sphere or not, and if so, then what has been ongoing in that case? No, it's a question directly to Anupam. Very interesting. I was in Punjab, not very, late, possibly in December, when at the peak of the stubble burning. Very interestingly, the stubble, paddy, the paddy stubble is collected from the field, baled, and then taken to the paper plants. So it is used as a alternative source of fuel rather than coal in the boilers. So the company can possibly say that, we are providing a social, service. We are using renewable energy instead of fossil fuel. So they are in terms greenwashing it while adding to the health cost in Punjab. So how do you capture those nuances is something I'm very keen to understand. Thanks.
I can address the second question, but Raghav, would you like to take the first question? Okay.
So as far as my understanding and my knowledge about the government of India's appetite for true cost accounting, I think we haven't started scoping that out. However, I think something in response to Avinash's comment, as well as your comment about this, I think let me clarify that we do not, or even TCI does not see true cost accounting as a silver bullet that can solve all the problems of food systems. It's a great step in that direction where we are trying to understand and unpack some of these layers, but that's only step one. So as I think somebody pointed out in the panel, what can't be measured can't be changed, right? So it's important to measure those things, and this is that step in that direction. And we are hopeful that once there is evidence and there is numbers around some of these hidden costs, there will be more productive and more constructive discourse around these. And then comes thinking about when you figured out this is the quantum of the impact of the existing food systems on the different aspects. How do you work with levers such as policy, private sector engagement, etc., to sort of improve some of these things? So that's in response to your first question, and you can maybe take the second question.
Thanks, Ritik. No, very interesting question. And maybe I'll start with saying that whenever we are doing a accounting exercise, and whenever we are looking into net benefit, so what you are, your question is, how do we calculate the net benefit, or whether it's actually a net benefit or not. So the net benefit exercise always requires a counterfactual. So you can always assess a delta positive or negative benefit with respect to a baseline. So if in this case your baseline is coal burning versus using a source of biomass energy, then what is the net benefit that can be calculated? Now, I mean, if you look into the valuation framework and if you look into the capital correlation framework, it always starts with, you know, two key questions: what to value and why. So what exactly are you trying to do with those values is also a big question. Are you just trying to showcase a very narrow positive story? I don't think that's the purpose of this whole exercise. We can't just showcase the positive story and not show the negative story. It's always holistic. So you have within the framework, you have to capture all the material aspects, whether it's positive or negative. Yes, there are aspects which cannot be monetized, and for such aspects, there's always a scope for you to report those in a qualitative way. I mean, Raghav mentioned about, you know, putting a price on someone's death. You can't put a price on mortality or death, but at least you can put a price on the productivity loss, or the cost of illness, or the medical cost, access to medical costs. So these costs are available, and you can always say that the value of someone's loss cannot be quantified in monetary term, and there were X number of deaths. Qualitative information can be added with the quantitative number. I hope that addresses your question.
Raghav, yes, please.
So this was something discussed when the true cost of the US report came, because I think the US report specifically mentioned that they did not take into account food loss, which I'm assuming is very difficult to figure out, because I think there's a reason they skipped that part. So I think, of course, there are challenges to particularly focus on food loss, especially when you're looking at a larger system. I guess if you were looking at a specific industry like the tomato industry, or focusing on a particular type of product or food, maybe it would be simpler, and so that could be included. But I remember reading the report and thinking, oh, they didn't focus on this, which means it must have been a huge challenge. But it's very important.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, if I may add to that, Raghav, I guess, but the framework is holistic. So the invisible outputs actually takes into account of that aspect as well. So within the framework, all the aspects gets covered. Whether we can quantify it is a question of data and the cost and the effort which is needed.
That's all, I guess. No more questions? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thank you all the panelists for their valuable time. Thank you, Raghav. Thank you, Anupam. Thank you, Sharika. Thank you, Ruben. And thank you, everyone, for being such an amazing audience. Thank you.